Well, we have about 30 people on the line, so we'll go ahead and get started and let whoever else is able to join us this morning join us when they can. So thank you everybody for making the time for our third workshop. My name is Monica Palmera. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm with the California Public Utilities Commission. And I'm joining you all actually from Chapel Hill, North Carolina, where I'm working out of right now, which is the traditional territories of the Eno, Lumbee, Tuscarora, and Shakori people. I'm also joined by my co-facilitators for this track. We've got Faye, you can wave Faye, in San Leandro, and then we have Nick. Where's Nick? Can you wave Nick? From Point Blue. And so we'll be working together on today's session. And we also have our LGC team and support team, Julia, John, Kelsey, and please forgive me if I'm forgetting anybody. I think I've got the main crew here. They've been super clutch as, doing all the logistics for this session. So we're really grateful for them and for them being here. So we don't have time for everybody to do introductions, but if y'all are able to put your name, if you have an organization you're representing, put that in the chat along with any location or land acknowledgement. We'd love to see who's here and where you're representing. Before we dive into the workshop today and the topic, I wanted to remind everybody about our group norms. We won't go through them today. We've gone through them over the last couple of workshops, so hopefully folks are pretty familiar with those. But Julia, thank you, Julia. She put them in the chat if folks wanted to check them out one more time. Just to, again, we're going to be pretty discussion based, particularly in the second half of the workshop. So want to make sure folks are aware of those norms so we can have a really healthy and productive conversation. So check those out when you get a moment. So today, this morning, we are here for our third workshop. And today's topic is about moving slow and fast, which is a little contradictory, but resilient strategies and processes with purpose. So today, Faye, Nick, and I, when we've been coming up along with Julia and the team, when we've been looking at what to make this third workshop about, we certainly went back to all of the feedback you all have provided throughout the course of the forum, as well as those initial exercises we did, those initial virtual prioritization workshops, some of y'all may remember. And we really tried to knit together a couple of big priorities that you all identified for today. So we heard pretty loud and clear that this need to balance meeting the moment of climate change and needing to take imminent climate action demands moving very quickly. But as we're trying to do that in an equitable manner, doing that purposefully and intentionally in leadership and in partnership with community can often mean things move a lot slower in order to build a really trusted process. And so how do we address both of those with our processes towards climate adaptation is what we're going to really be focusing on today. We're also going to be trying to touch a little bit on engagement strategies. Of course, these are unprecedented times. Nobody's ever said that. And we're moving into a really different kind of engagement environment where we're going to be certainly needing to leverage our virtual platforms more, maybe being able to incorporate in person more down the road. And what does that kind of hybrid engagement environment look like? So we're obviously all still learning a lot of lessons about what that may be and what may be, good practices and not so good practices, but we're going to try to scratch the surface of that a little bit today in terms of thinking about what hybrid practices on engagement we can lift up that might help us meet this slow and fast demand. So that's what we're going to be thinking about today. And to do that, we have three amazing presenters, which we'll be introducing to you all. They're going to talk a little bit about the work that they do and their initiatives and how they kind of try to bridge some of these challenges that we've identified. Just to note before we dive into the panel, that this is our so the forum, the way the forum is structured, if you all remember, we had an introductory workshop back in July. And this is the third of three workshops in the series. We will have one final webinar, I believe it's in October, an outcomes webinar where we'll talk about takeaways from these workshops and all of these sessions, feature a few case studies that show best practices, and kind of wrap up our collective discussion as part of this forum. So keep on the lookout for that. Hopefully it's already on your calendar, but just know that we're almost towards the end of our track here for the forum. So without further ado, hopefully folks are still introducing themselves in the chat. It looks like, and we see people from all over, which is great. We'll dive into our panel first. And our first presenter is going to be Baja. Now, Baja, are you here? Just want to see if you're here. I think I see you.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'm here.
Hi.
Hi.
Welcome. Welcome. If it's okay with you, I'm going to read a quick bio for you and then hand it over if that works for you. Great. Great. So Kristen Baja, or Baja, she's joining us from the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, where she is Climate Resilience Officer. And she's responsible for helping cities identify strategic ways to advance climate resilience planning and implementation and building their capacity to take proactive action. And this is the upcoming line I'm about to read is the best line I've read in a bio like ever. Baja calls herself the mycelium in the forest and strives to bring resources and nutrients to communities while also decomposing old practices and helping to design and develop more human-centered processes and projects. So that's an awesome line, Baja. That's a great line. And Baja has over 10 years of experience working on resilience hubs and has supported several communities in activating hubs. She's going to talk to us about resilience hubs. And then in 2016, she was recognized by the Obama administration as a champion of change for her work on climate and equity. So we're really grateful to have you here, Baja. Hopefully if you have slides, hopefully you know how to share them. Let us know if you have any technical needs, but feel free to take it away.
All righty. I always got to get to that view. So let's see if we can make that work. All right.
It's looking, we see the speaker view, like the one with the next slide.
Okay, let's try
Julia,
it again.
I had this problem once. I don't know if you know how to fix that. Oh, you're good now. You're good.
Okay, well, we'll try for all the views here.
Whatever you did a second ago was working. You had the whole slide. It looked good.
Okay, can you see my text though for the next slide?
Yeah.
Okay. That's okay. I will do it without my text, which is going to be great because I've done this plenty of times in my life. So we will just go into slideshow. And just first, thank you so much for having me. I want to acknowledge a few things to get started. First, that I'm on the land of the Piscataway people here in Maryland, and just really acknowledge the history of genocide and horrific actions that were taken against the people who were here before the colonizers, and appreciate the land that I'm standing on right now. I also want to acknowledge that I am a white woman in a white body, and that my white skin color does play a lot of advantage in the way that I am set up in the world and what I have access to. And so just to acknowledge that as we move into this conversation, that I understand my privilege that comes along with just an unearned privilege. Lastly, thank you so much for having me. It's lovely to see certain faces that are on and names for others. So I'm here to talk a bit about resilience hubs and quickly just kind of give some information about what they are, but also the sort of speed up, slow down necessary sort of approach, which is I have been working on resilience hubs for 10 years. I started on resilience hubs actually in a really damaging way, where I worked for the city of Baltimore and started with the FEMA initiative, which was to make plans and build kits and try to help each other. And in the helping each other part, we really learned in the process that there's a real reason that community doesn't trust government. And that's because government has been structured to benefit white male landowners over all others, and has created so many racist and discriminatory policies and practices that there was no reason for anybody to believe that we were coming into this authentically or had any reason that was of benefit for the community. So instead of continuing down the pathway of just trying to shove a FEMA project their direction, we stopped, slowed down, and actually took an entire year to have conversations with folks and really learn more about their experience with the city, and also what their needs would be, how they had experienced different disruptions in the past, and what their needs would be if we weren't just focusing on the hazard, but we were focusing on the whole human. And so we sort of took this traditional approach, this siloed traditional approach of response and recovery, and the sort of hazard being the center point of everything we do around adaptation and resilience, and shifted it into a more respect-based approach. How are we thinking about getting out of the idea of extraction from both humans and the ecosystem and moving into centering the needs of people and their connectivity, and I would say connectivity with each other and connectivity with the greater ecosystem and how they play a role in both as the focal point for thinking about resilience in communities. And so that was breaking down a traditional model that I think is still in the process of actually breaking down. This is not like, oh, everybody's just been like, yeah, that's exactly what we should do. And, you know, to be honest with you, still sort of fighting a lot of the federal models in this space. But one method we kind of came up with that really did start with the community and that I've been working on now with several different sites in both the US and Canada is getting out of the sort of cookie cutter of creating emergency sites, emergency spaces, or having disaster shelters, or having something that only opens in the event of a disruption. Instead, thinking about how are we enhancing community resilience and connectivity and the adaptive capacity year-round? How are we thinking about relationships and facilitating relationships? How are we thinking about the social needs and the economic needs, as well as the ecological connectivity in a site? And instead of coming down from a top-down approach, how are we just providing some framing and guidance, but actually hearing what people's needs are in a specific neighborhood? So not having this cookie cutter approach, not treating everybody the same. And that's a really big shift in a lot of the hazard mitigation field and the climate adaptation field. I think even what we continue to do right now in the climate space of creating climate action plans and doing certain things that are very traditional. So the piece about resilience hubs, and the reason we came up with resilience hubs, is to get down into the neighborhood level really requires looking at an existing space or an existing place that people trust and will go to. And instead of it focusing on this sort of technological approach or what are the big infrastructure solutions, getting into the social connectivity, the social systems, and listening to where people feel that they're safe, listening to a space that they already go to. And that could be something very non-traditional. It's not usually the local library. It is honestly usually an existing community center or an existing space. Sometimes it's somebody's home where people feel welcome. They feel like they can come and access community and access resources, and that it's something where they feel respected. And that's essentially what we're trying to do, is instead of saying, let's have emergency shelters or emergency spaces, let's shift to a holistic version of resilience. And that's what I mean. Resilience for hubs is a holistic version of resilience, where we're thinking about people being able to thrive in the everyday and also have the capacity to support and withstand in case of the different types of disasters and disruptions that we do have. And that we're focusing on this shifting of power and resources away from the traditional into an actual community-led, community-supported, community self-determined space. And this is a real issue in a lot of ways for legal departments. It's a real issue for a lot of traditional decision makers. And I honestly think it's become more apparent to me. It's a real issue for folks who are working in the field in a very traditional way, because we've been taught and trained in a specific way to think this is what we're doing to impact climate change, and not really taught to be active listeners, not really taught to say, what is the community guiding us to do? And then how are we actually shifting power to make sure that can happen? So that's why I think this definition of resilience for hubs is really important. When I talk about resilience, I am not saying resilience in the way that it is the sort of archaic or intended to be a placeholder for climate adaptation. I am talking about it as a year-round, holistic, comprehensive social component. And so when we're talking about then resilience for hubs, when we talk about resilience hubs, we're looking at these community serving facilities, and they are usually sites that already exist. Those tend to be the best ones, although in some locations we've had newer ones. They typically will not be run or owned by government because of that distrust, because of that history, because government still functions in a way that's very much set up on racist policies and systems and practices. And so we are actually saying, can these be sites that people go to that they trust, where we can try to bring in communication, resource distribution, and other opportunities that provide this enhanced quality of life, and also enhance the ability for the community to be more self-determining in the event of a disruption. So I said I've been working on these for 10 years. I really have been. I will tell you, the framing for it didn't exist for a long time. It was a big experiment of a lot of things that I did very wrong for a long time, or where I learned a lot from all the different folks within my community and from different spaces that I've been working with. I now support 250 different member communities and all over North America. So I've had an opportunity to learn a lot throughout that process. What came of that was that we need some foundational components, these sort of core areas to come back to. So not only that different stakeholder groups could find a place to support these hubs, but also so they have an opportunity to understand where funding, finance, and different resources can come in. I'm not going to read these to you. You can have these slides, but essentially these are the 5 foundational areas: the services and programming, the communications, the building and landscape, the power system, the thing that always gets left off, which is the operations and maintenance. Everybody wants to make resilience hubs into power system or power hubs. That's not what these are intended to be. There's certainly resilient power projects that I am all for, but if they're sited on the wrong building and they're not supported by the community, they're not going to actually be as beneficial. And I also think we've learned in COVID that power systems are not the only thing that we need when it comes to needing to be having resilient spaces. So we've kind of structured these into 3 modes, understanding that we need to understand the everyday non-disruption mode. And then also that if we're going to have both short and long-term disruptions, there are going to be different needs on the site, and this recovery space. How are we in the process of returning to everyday mode, which I think is actually potentially, we're not going to have very many non-disruption days moving forward. How are we thinking about the different functions that are needed in the different support elements? And then also, how are we phasing it in over time? So with the community, how are we identifying the baseline components that make a hub right now? Can it serve food? Can it get clean water to people? Do they know that it's a space for honest, open communication and information? Other sort of baseline criteria, and then things that they want that might change, a maker space or mental health services or other things that could happen at the site. In the ideal, if somebody's going to drop a couple $2 billion on you, here's what we would want. It's always nice to have goals. So phasing it in over time. And just understanding that within each of these 5 foundation areas, this is the way we kind of structured some of the outreach and some of the engagement, so folks understand that this is really community-led and identified, and this is just a structure to start to identify where we have existing resources and where different ones need to potentially come in. This also helps with identifying partners. So I want to just be also very honest that the reason I won't talk about case studies, I will talk about progress reports, is that no 2 resilience hubs are alike. They adapt and evolve, they change, and they change based on the community to reflect the community. Just like an octopus that's hiding and they can change all their colors to be able to ebb and flow and hide. The same thing with these hubs. They're going to evolve and change and be different based on the community that they're serving. So there is no one size fits all. There is no one thing. There is no case study of the best resilience hub. There's a lot that are in progress. And so we have a lot of progress reports. We do have a website with a lot of resources that give the what, why, and how, basically everything I just said, if you're interested. And then also to note that we have a community of practice where it's set up in a Creative Commons, where folks can take a bunch of our baseline information and put the Creative Commons attribution and use that and then alter it for their specific context. And then we have a bigger sort of cohort that's working together. A lot of these resources exist online right now. One of the ones that we're working on right now is actually the funding puzzle, which I will say, because there is no one source of funding for resilience hubs and the holistic concept hasn't really been adopted nationwide, it does still require putting together the different pieces of funding. And we have a sort of funding and finance document that is going to be coming out at the end of this year that will give opportunities in different ways. But I think that will change for different states and different regions as well. So we look for partners to support in some of that. And the biggest last piece I will mention is this is really a collaboration. this is not just like USDN runs and owns this. We have a bunch of members and a bunch of partners and a bunch of other folks who are working on resilience hubs. We're trying to connect them and collaborate so that everybody's not reinventing the wheel, creating brand new things, but understanding that the more benefit we're going to get from collectively working together, building off that Creative Commons, connecting with some of the resource partners that we have in place, and then identifying new brilliant minds to bring in. That's what we're looking for. So USDN is looking to be sort of the connector and the collaborative support, but we're always looking for people to be involved and always looking to support our members as well as others who are not in the membership. So that is a basic intro, and I'm happy to answer any questions as we move forward.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Baja. That was great. I think if it's okay, I'm not seeing any questions directly in the chat. I do have questions. I have questions, but I'm going to wait, I think, for a second. We'll hear from our other two folks, and then I'll probably ask y'all all together. So just hang tight if you can, and we'll come back with some questions for you. So thanks so much again, Baja. Just want to make sure we have Laura Gracia. Are you, I think I saw your name here.
Hi.
Hi, Laura. Hey. So thank you, Laura, for joining us. We're going to hear from our next presenter. I'm going to give a quick introduction to you, if that's all right. So Laura Gracia is the Climate Adaptation, Resiliency, Enhancement Care Coordinator for Communities for a Better Environment. Welcome, Laura. She began at CBE as a Richmond youth organizer and developed the Richmond branch of CBE's Youth EJ program, where CBE's youth members are fighting environmental injustices and moving towards a just transition. Laura brings deep organizing experience to her new role as coordinator for CBE's CARE program, which we're going to hear about today. And Laura also serves on the Richmond Progressive Alliance's steering committee, where she focuses on youth engagement and environmental justice. So thank you so much, Laura, for joining us. If you have any slides, are you able to share them and navigate them? Hopefully you can, and if you need any technical support, let us know, but feel free to take it away.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I'll chat a little bit and then I'll share a few slides in a bit. So hi, everyone. This is Laura. I use she and they pronouns. I'm the Climate Adaptation and Resilience Enhancement Coordinator. Thank you, Monica, for that introduction. I don't live in Richmond anymore. I live in Los Angeles, so I'm in unceded Tongva territory. So unfortunately, my time at the RPA is done. But thank you all, and I'm happy to be here. So yeah, Communities for a Better Environment. We're an environmental justice organization. We work to build people power in low-income communities of color. We have over 40 years of organizing experience in Southeast LA, Wilmington, East Oakland, and in Richmond. So I'm housed out of our Wilmington office and support our statewide teams in building out climate adaptation curriculum and supporting organizers to build community leadership in addressing climate adaptation needs. So Wilmington is a predominantly Latinx community. It's near five refineries. It has the largest oil field on the West Coast and also the largest port. And so when we're talking about climate adaptation and resilience, you know, we can't forget like both the mitigation strategies that need to happen, the phasing out of fossil fuels, as well as supporting communities on the ground. And this is really important because, as was said already, resilience isn't going to look the same across the board. It's not going to look the same across communities. And so one of the things that members and our community leaders have continuously highlighted that we cannot look past is continuing to prioritize the phasing out of fossil fuels, pushing for an environmental, for a just transition. And a just transition requires us to address the extractive economy that's rooted in colonialism, white supremacy, and patriarchy. And how are we dismantling all of those things at the local level, at the internal level, city level, to truly build the regenerative economy? And the regenerative economy is based in care, in sacredness for resources, and sacredness for community. So that's really the framework that we operate under. And if folks are curious to learn more about the Just Transition Framework, I encourage you to go to our website. We have a care manual that we created with community members, and there's a really good introduction to the Just Transition framework there. And then, so that's who we are and how do we operate? So reflecting on that, how do we speed up but also slow down? Last year, CBE hit that wall, as I'm sure all of us did, like COVID. I mean, we were all super overwhelmed. And along with supporting, the uprisings and continuing to build community, we definitely did that as an organization. So we, for many years now, we work as a triad. So if you think of a triangle, organizing is at the top, and then we have our legal department and our research department. So we do have attorneys that are in CBE. We also have scientists, and the way that they are bound in their work is always to push the questions that communities are asking, that our community members are asking. So we are a community member-based organization, and that includes youth members. We organize in high schools, as well as colleges. And then we also work with adult members, a lot of them monolingual, migrant communities of color. And so our triad model really holds us accountable to making sure that we're going at the pace of community, that we're meeting where community members are at. A lot of us also grew up and live in the communities that we work in. So I think that that's also an advantage. We have that personal lived experience. And so we organize as a triad. And last year, our triad was definitely, we didn't know how to support community members. We funneled resources to them as to where they can, get food, like information around COVID, how folks can stay safe. And we really needed to stop a lot of our programming. And we ended up doing a lot of mutual aid work. We worked with a lot of collectives, local collectives in our communities to help distribute food. We created we supported a collective in building out our buddy to buddy program. We were distributing food directly to elders' homes. And we also created a community fund. And so all of this is going back to what does it mean to be resilient, right? Folks were having a hard time engaging with our existing campaigns. Folks are having a hard time thinking about what's going to happen in 5 years, what's going to happen in 10 years. The climate crisis is it's not existent from a day to day. So we were really working on building those relationships at the local level. And all of this is super important when you think about resilience hubs, right? We need that social community cohesion in order to organize and in order to act during an emergency. And so we really practiced that last year, and we've been building on those relationships this year. We'll be hosting different herbal support sessions for community members. And so that's some of the work that was happening here. Well, statewide, in Northern California, there was also like a lot of fast response work because of the fires in the Bay Area. We were distributing N95s that were really difficult to get a hold of. We were distributing goggles to a lot of unhoused members. The sky was really bad last year. And we were also distributing air filters so that folks can create really cheap box fan air filters. And so all of that, so we were doing that external work more locally. We did put a pause to a lot of our campaigns. We built out a really strong framework for how we engage at a local level with other organizations and other collectives. And then internally, we were also needing to face a lot of our, we're an organization. An organization is because of laws and rules and just the way that organizations have brand. there's inherently a lot of white supremacist policies and practices that we carry. So we also took a step back. We have been undergoing, it's been about 2.5 years now of training. We've been doing anti-Blackness training to identify those those things that are internal at a personal level, but also how are we making sure that we're dismantling that as an organization to become an anti-racist organization, to truly practice that and also build that language with community members. We are an organization that's predominantly led with a community of color. I mean, all of us are pretty much POC. But even then, there's still a lot of anti-Blackness in non-Black communities. And so that's kind of the infrastructure that has helped us hold ourselves accountable, not just to the work that we say we want, our vision that we want, but also to community members. And then community involvement. So I do have a few slides that I'm happy to share, just so you're not just looking at my face. And some of the work that we've been doing, some really great examples have been building out our curriculum. So we hold summer trainings with our community members. I know where the presentation is. I know it's here somewhere. View. Oh no. Okay, here we go. We did it. Yeah, so I think I mentioned some of this already. How do we address the fast response? At a very small, also really manageable level for community. We've talked about DIY air filters. We've been building out our emergency preparedness trainings. One of the steps that we're taking now is working directly with mutual aid groups that support unhoused communities, especially those that are doing like fast response. And when there's a sweep, there have been a lot more sweeps in Los Angeles recently. And so how are we making sure that our unhoused neighbors are safe and have access to things to materials that they need during a bad air day or just in general. So that's really important too, because we've been training our community members to identify what are some of the risks that we should be on the lookout for, as well as they've been teaching us what are the things that they do at home to stay safe. And it's really important to listen to that. A lot of our members are low income, as I said, migrant, monolingual speakers. And so, there's a lot that our elders teach us. A lot of it being holistic medicine, a lot of it being very just small tricks that I would have never thought of. So we've been building out this curriculum for since 2013. We started actively calling it the Climate Adaptation Program. And so yeah, so that's that. We've been kind of building out some of our social media reach to try to support folks. We know that this is not, the best solution, especially since a lot of folks may not have access to social media. And also it's not helpful when there's a power outage, but we're trying to make sure that we're talking about this year long so that we continue to build out this language with community members. So I've talked a little bit about our mutual aid work, about the community fund, and we've been working closely. Oh, this is the care manual in case you ever want to go check it out. It's on our website. I can add the link to the chat in a little bit. But some of the work, an example of how we've been building out our resilience work is back in 2017, we did do a collaboration with the Tucci Clinic. It's a local clinic here in Wilmington. And we started off as a cooling center. So we did do outreach to the like stores and just the community centers, and we would put up flyers that said, you know, come to the Tucci Clinic, we'll have food and snacks. And it worked out really well, and then it didn't work out really well. Obviously, we didn't have a lot of staff, so that there was a limited staff capacity. The clinic also had to eventually close, right? So that was definitely something that we're continuously trying to address, is those limited hours of operation and overall lack of funds. From this project, we learned a lot. We also held so many community visioning sessions with members, and we did, and I don't have a picture of it, I'm sorry about that, but we did identify a different location, which is the senior center. It's really close to public transportation. It's very close to one of the schools. So it was a place that folks already trusted really well, that was pretty accessible. And from all of the community visioning sessions, we identified this place. We said, this place is where we're going to prioritize solar and storage. And luckily, one of our allies got funding to do solar and storage in Wilmington, and the senior center in Wilmington now has solar and storage to be able to support elders and folks during an emergency. And so we're continuously building out that relationship to build those blocks of leaders that are nearby so that we can act. And a lot of this has been happening with the support of physicians, scientists, and engineers. We're working on this project right now in collaboration with APEN, the Asian Pacific Environmental Network. And it's been really great. So this is the last question I was asked to touch on, is that community involvement in short time. So at least for communities, for us, CBE, we every year have community planning. So we'll have our internal planning as an organization, and then our members will meet and do yearly planning. So if you're a larger organization and you want to work with communities, find out what we're interested in, find out what we're working on, because there are things that we already have lined up, that we've already identified with community, that you can support us getting funding on, right? I think the hardest part is definitely when organizations are really interested and really want to support us, and it's just a whole new project that is really great, really important, but it's just, we do not have capacity at the moment, and it hasn't been identified as a priority by community members. And so find out what it is that, how you can support the work that we're doing at a community level. And something that PSC has been really helpful with is just technical support, overall technical support in writing grants and just doing all of the research. Yeah, I think those are the two of the best examples I can think of to larger organizations or agencies or departments that want to engage with community, is meet folks where they're at, preferably in advance. Quick turnarounds are really hard to respond to, but also there's definitely something that we're already working on that will be connected to what you might be proposing, and there is a way to support the work that is already existing at the ground. So meet us there. I think that's definitely one of the message I would like folks to walk away with. And I think that's it for me.
Great. Thank you so much, Lauda. That was right on, and really appreciate your insights into just, how to really just plug in what the organizations are doing themselves, and this really interesting the triad model that you all have in terms of how you're structured and how that sort of helps you all navigate these big challenges. Definitely some good takeaways, and we'll definitely come back to you as well with Baja with some questions right after, if you're able to hang on just a little bit for our last presenter. So thanks again, Lauda. Manny, do we still have you on the line?
Yeah.
Hi, Manny. Here, I'll do a quick intro for you. Thank you so much for being with us. So we have Manuel Oliva, or Manny, who's the CEO of Point Blue Conservation Science with us today. And he has over 25 years of experience working on a broad range of climate change and natural resource conservation issues across different sectors like agriculture, energy, and both urban and rural, and in collaboration with diverse global partners, so local and national governments, private sector, and local communities. Manuel has served in leadership positions for organizations such as the Foreign Agricultural Service of the U.S., Department of Agriculture, U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, Conservation International, and the city of Washington, D.C. So thank you so much, Manny, for being with us, and feel free to take it away.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Again, my name is Manny Oliva, and I use he, him pronouns, and I am calling this morning from the ancestral and unceded lands of the Ohlone people. I do want to thank everyone for joining today, and it's a privilege to join this conversation. I don't have any slides to share, but I think that I'll just try to keep it brief, and we can go into a discussion. So Point Blue Conservation Science is a California nonprofit working to advance nature-based solutions to climate change and protect the ecosystems that sustain healthy and wildlife human communities. And I was thinking about this concept, and when we were talking about this presentation, about this idea of move faster and slow. And really that's kind of emphasizes in the way that we work. For example, we've been working over 5 decades to advance the science of around climate change, around conservation, with partners and through outreach, implement these solutions today, while also learning from the solutions and building upon the knowledge gained from those solutions so that we can adapt the solutions over time and also build future solutions. So we're trying to adapt today, but also learn for tomorrow and help empower others for tomorrow. In terms of just to frame sort of my presentation, I think all of us are aware of the urgency around climate change right now and the moment that we're in. There is a recent United Nations report that really emphasizes that unless we make dramatic and drastic sort of cuts in global greenhouse gas emissions, that the direct effects that we're already feeling, heat waves, sea level rise, severe wildfires, they're just going to continue, and they're going to continue to get stronger and disrupt people's lives and really sort of tear at that social structures to continue to do that for decades to come. And I think that emphasizes that we need to really renew our focus on climate adaptation strategies. At the same time, the critical ecosystems and biodiversity that underpin a lot of our well-being are under tremendous stress. And by those systems breaking down, they indirectly affect people's lives. For example, water availability or food production, or just access to nature in terms of for cooling or recreation. So targeting these strategies as well to also look at how do we shore up our natural systems is an important part of this adaptation, or the way we're viewing adaptation strategies. These dual pressures of climate change, sort of the direct and indirect effects, will absolutely exacerbate already existing inequalities. But it's not just the effects of climate change that are going to have the potential to exacerbate in already existing inequalities. It's the solutions we choose. We can choose solutions and adaptation strategies that alleviate these inequalities or continue to exacerbate these inequalities. And therefore, when we think about adaptation or resilient strategies, we have to, and the science that underpins these practices and solutions, they have to be developed in partnership. They have to be developed in partnership with all of the impacted communities, not just because of the equity lens that has to be incorporated into these solutions, but at the same time, because of the tremendous potential of these communities to offer new and innovative ways of thinking, to adapt solutions, to help create solutions that will last longer and be more impactful. I just wanted to share a few ways that we're thinking about equity in terms of our adaptation work. And just to emphasize before this, that this is a learning experience. This is something that we are learning from and adapting and partnering with others to help us learn and do a better job of making sure that we are recognizing and including equity within potential adaptation strategies. So in terms of a few of these examples, in terms of sea level rise, for example, we developed a tool that models across the entire California coast what will it look like for the next 10, 20, 50 years as sea level rises how will that impact the coastal communities that live on those areas? And help kind of guide what are potential nature-based solutions that would help these communities adapt to this sea level rise, to protect the communities and to protect valuable ecosystems that these communities rely on. Now, as part of this work, we normally we reach out and work with local communities to identify what are the issues and how can these solutions address their needs. But one thing we have recognized is that we're not always incorporating all of the communities that are impacted. And we've started looking at a new tool at evaluating human use areas, or human use patterns of these areas, so that we can understand better who is going to be impacted by the effects of climate change and who's going to be impacted by the solutions that we choose. For example, one project that we're working on right now is in Stinson Beach and in Marin County. And the idea there is who is not just developing solutions for Stinson Beach to help adapt, create sort of adaptation or resiliency solutions for the beach as sea level rises, not just working with the local communities, but who's visiting these communities? Who's visiting these areas? And how do we invite them to participate in the design and implementation of these projects? Visitors often come to the beach, these visitors are usually from more diverse backgrounds, and they rely on these beaches as important areas to cool and recreate during hot days. And if they're not invited to participate, then these solutions that are planned or put together could adversely impact their well-being. And so by creating a new model of sort of evaluating human use patterns of these areas, we're hoping that we can create longer lasting and more equitable nature-based solutions to sea level rise. In terms of agriculture, another area that we work in, we've been asked by the Department of Agriculture to conduct soil research to identify, are there policies that we can put into place that will provide funding for farmers and ranchers to mitigate climate change, to essentially sequester carbon within soil, and also to help soils become healthier areas for plant and for production, for agricultural production and just plant growth. Unfortunately, often these financial support goes to farmers and ranchers who have larger land and who have more capacity to implement these solutions. So one way that we wanted to really rethink the way that these programs work is any new policies that are coming out, any new financial incentives, they need to reach the community members who have less capacity to implement these, who need more technical assistance or assistance to navigate the often cumbersome processes to receive these financial incentives. And so we're working with the Department of Agriculture to identify areas where you have smaller landholders and often underrepresented farmers and ranchers, to ensure that we put a partner biologist there in that community so they can connect them to these resources, and so that we can develop this research and solutions in a way that is also is gaining from their knowledge, but also thinking about the challenges that they would have in terms of implementation. We're also working with other NGOs to identify this scientific research that we're developing. How can we use it to raise additional private capital that can often bridge the gap that public funding doesn't necessarily reach for these underrepresented farmers and ranchers? Finally, in terms of education, one of the things that as a scientific institution, we have this long history of working with early career scientists, giving them the tools and the experience to develop climate adaptation strategies. These are the scientists of the future. And we've been fortunate enough to have many students and many early career people work with us over the time that we've existed. And as we look now into the future needs, the future needs for innovative climate adaptation solutions, we need to make sure that these solutions are at the leading edge and also incorporate equity naturally within these systems, naturally within these solutions. And so we're looking, how do we then diversify the earlier career scientists that work with us? One of the programs that we've implemented is looking at a program that specifically targets community college students. I myself went to a community college, and I understand the huge potential of the students there to become those future scientists that are going to make these amazing, innovative scientific research that is going to help create more equitable and longer lasting and more impactful adaptation strategies that are just necessary in terms of that long-term view. Again, we're still in this learning process, and we're looking at how to better incorporate equity within our education and our scientific programs. And I am eager to learn from all of you and partner to ensure that we can. So I think that's where I'll stop. I appreciate the time.
Thank you so much, Manny. And thank you, Laura and Baja, all for your presentations as well. And so if y'all can hang on the line for a little bit longer, I'm going to ask a few questions and kind of try to thread together all three of you and your unique experiences on this subject matter. So, okay, so first off, I'm going to reflect a little bit on at least what I heard between you three in terms of this again, going fast, going slow question that we're really trying to tackle here. And I think, what I'm certainly taking out of y'all's presentations first is learning from mistakes we've made in the past and making sure that we really meaningfully learn from them, identify them, don't be afraid to say we've made mistakes, and really incorporate that into our thinking as we move forward. I think I've also heard from you all really relying on deep past engagement and organizing that's happened over the course of many years. Manny, you mentioned long-term partnerships. Baja, you mentioned like your long career in this, like really leaning on those relationships and that work to really meet the crises points that we have to face moving forward. I also really heard active listening, but like really listen and like be willing to kind of change how we do things. I know this is even hard for, like, I'm in government and I'm trying to think about how I can wedge things into our traditional proceeding process. And it's like, no, we got to think differently. And it's hard for those of us in government to sometimes think that way. But if we're really going to listen, we have to really rethink our models. And then I also heard working with youth, early career, and really addressing racist practices in our organizations and in our own histories. We have to really be upfront about that. We really have to think about how we're diversifying our employees and doing anti-racism work in our organizations in order to really like move forward and to have an impact. So these are some of the themes that I was hearing. I wanted to go to a question that was put forth for Baja, but then would love to hear the others respond. And it's from Justina. And it's, back to this like how you structure engagement. So she was asking, or this person was asking, how have you structured engagement and conversation with community members to inform your models and understanding of what is needed at resiliency hubs? And again, from all of you would want to hear, like, how do y'all actually go about structuring engagement processes slow and fast? So go ahead, Baja, first.
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. I think one of the main things that we do is not consider them engagement sessions, and instead really structured around who are the partners and the folks that are going to be working with us for a longer period of time, and what is the best method that exists now that's identified by that group of individuals for setting up listening opportunities, setting up relationship building opportunities, and continuing to meet and gather in a way that they feel safe and feel comfortable. We often will also, if desired, provide some structure or some ways that we've done sessions to gather information about each one of the categories as an option, and offer to either work with a facilitator that they trust or work with certain members of the community themselves to facilitate the meetings or whatever feels best. But provide opportunities for structure, and then also understand sometimes that structure doesn't work for everybody. And so to also step back and listen and be guided throughout the process. It's really different across the board. I've had a lot of different experiences with this. Some of them have been documented in places like Ward 7, where we worked in DC, and that was a multi-year community-led advisory committee that went through a whole process. Others where we have partners like Climate Resolve in Southern California, they know the community, they have really strong relationships with the community. We provide some of the guidance and tools, and then they can adapt and change those through the Creative Commons to best meet the needs of the community members and continue to build those relationships. So again, my number one thing I would say to anything is there is no one size fits all. We just try to provide whatever folks need in a way that feels safe and healthy for them.
I don't know if Laura or Manny have any reflection.
Sure. This is a huge challenge, and it's something that we're continuing to learn and adapt from, and hope to do so. In terms of when we think about science, we're thinking about learning, this idea of observation and learning and studying. And we're constantly looking for ways to do that. And one of the ways that I think we're really been successful at learning a little bit more is this idea of our partner biologists. Our partner biologists are people who live in the communities. So they're not just some scientist that's coming down saying, hey, I know all this stuff. They're part of this community saying, we have this science, we want to partner with you together, but we want to learn from you. We want to learn because you have this knowledge, this incredible place-based knowledge, and how do we mesh these things together? And by having them be community members, as opposed to somebody coming from wherever else, I think it provides a little bit of trust building that we hope creates an exchange of knowledge for us and for them, and then we can build solutions together.
Love that, sourcing scientists locally. I like that. Laura, please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned this already. We do have weekly member meetings. So our community member, and this is open. We have like our very core members that have been with us for years. And then we have like our larger base, and so we do meet every week. Some three examples that are really clear on times when I've been challenged I've been encouraged to challenge the process has been, this is a very small example, but there was a panel locally, and then making sure, I think my concern was like, are we, and this is a continuous thing that I've been struggling with, but how are we making sure that we're we're taking a step back and having Indigenous folks speak up and take ownership of spaces. And so at a recent panel, there was a lot of trying to figure out, like, is this the right thing? So being willing to challenge the space, being willing to step away from the process if that's what Indigenous folks are asking for, right? So listening to folks and being willing to challenge the process, being willing to disrupt the process, and I think that's something that's really important. And then for like our community plan, right now Los Angeles is undergoing community plan, and oh my gosh, it's ridiculous. There's like 300 pages of like nothing, like none of it makes sense. But I've been working with a few students, and we created a game. It's like, I don't know if you've ever played Candyland, but we made Wilmas Landia. Wilmas is what you call Wilmington for short, and Landia is just like land in Spanish. It's not even a real word. But it was just a fun way to try to like have this conversation and really break it down. And so, yeah, it's really important to work with CBOs and folks that already have those relationships with community so that you can break it down.
That's super. I love that that game. And Laura, one thing I also saw in your presentation, some of the imagery that y'all had to distribute to community members. I thought it was interesting how some of it addressed really short-term disaster-oriented needs, but then had like a little bit of like, how does this affect your long-term health or something? And I think that was a really great example of like, okay, short term, this is what we have to deal with right now, but like also think longer term, like how do we try to balance those in engagement processes? And I just thought that was a really neat example that you had in your slide. Really quick, there was a question in the chat that hopefully I think should be pretty quick. Are the community members that you work with provided stipends or any kind, how y'all deal with like compensating community, I think would be helpful to understand.
Yeah, we do provide, so for CBE, we provide stipends. It kind of, again, we identify in the community planning. So what are the needs that folks have? We do provide stipends for the communities that want to prioritize it. We also do community budgeting with our members. So we identify those needs. And we also always, like when we're hiring staff, interns, phone bankers, we always start with the folks that we're building leadership with. And like I said, it's really great because our base is already the folks we're working with, low income communities of color, and they have that personal experience.
I can say that not all of our community members believe in stipends as being the thing that they want. And I think Laura kind of got to that, but we offer everybody something for their time and for their capacity, whether that ends up being fiscal, whether it ends up being certain types of resources, whether it ends up being access to certain types of information that's identified differently. A lot of the folks that we work with from the communities in like Maui or Honolulu, what they want is very, very different than folks in Florida or even in California. So I think it's actually asking, as Laura said, like what do folks want to feel as compensated to value for their time, and how often, and having them set up that platform with us ahead of time is really important. Also making sure we always add that as a line item, no matter what, to every single thing we're doing, I think is really critical. There was one other thing about compensation that I completely forgot, and this is way COVID impacted my brain, so I'm going to let it go.
It's okay. You can add it in the chat later if you remember it. Manny, don't know if you have thoughts yet.
Really quickly. So mostly the workshops that we usually do are in partnership with state agencies or federal agencies. So we work with them to identify, hopefully, stipends and support for people. In terms of our other programs, we usually, similar to what Basha was saying, we usually try to identify what are the resources that you're trying to get. And we sort of try to make sure that we can get those to them. For example, our partner biologists are trying to identify sort of what are financial incentives or support that you can get, and here's the way that we can help you do that, because that's what they're valuing. But I think it is still for us, absolutely, this is an evolving conversation that I think that needs to be more front and center of how we do these kind of collaborative efforts.
Yes. No, absolutely. And I mean, just for my government partners on the line, like write whatever you can into your budgets and figure out what authority you have to do these things. It's hard. Sometimes legal and fiscal doesn't always love it, or it's new to them, but finding ways to make budget for whatever that compensation may be is definitely important. There's one more question in the chat, but I do have one before we go to the chat question. So this virtual engagement piece. So asking y'all to think about this, whether you've had to do sort of hybrid virtual engagement at this point yet or not. So thinking about all that we've been talking about, now thinking about doing it in like blending in person and virtual, how do y'all think about navigating that? What do you think you would lean, like how would you prepare to maybe do sort of like a hybrid engagement model, and or like what good practices have you seen thus far? Reflections on that would be helpful. Feel free to go first, whoever unmutes quickest.
I have a just quick example. We have an education program called our the Students and Teachers Restoring the Watershed, which has been around for 20 plus years, and it works with K through 12 students. And we work in person. They come and restore a watershed. I mean, we work with teachers to build curriculum around environmental sort of issues and conservation and how they can contribute and learn from them. But then we take them out to the field. We weren't able to do that this past year. So what we did is we created virtual programs where they take a plant that the teachers have this plant from one of our nurseries and they raise it at home, and we go talk with them sort of virtually. And one of the lessons we've learned is that there has to be this tactile kind of part of this process that's fundamental, and we found a way to do that. But we were able to expand who we were reaching. So we were able to reach other communities who normally can't drive or transport those students to these locations to learn about restoration. And suddenly there's another opportunity to reach other communities of kids who normally wouldn't be able to participate in this kind of program. And we're sort of excited about having that as a module, as in addition to the other things that we're trying to do in person.
Super helpful.
I'm happy to add in that I think one of the examples that we've seen work really well is actually hosting meetings outside and having a virtual option that goes with that. So folks who want to opt in for virtual, who are making a choice to not engage outside or to be around groups of people, that they have a link and there's more outreach. There is often a generational gap with especially access. And so also acknowledging that and being able to provide access to resources and engagement through different avenues and looking at all those different pathways, I think is really critical. COVID is definitely put a strain on the traditional and certainly something we're continuing to try to do outside under covered pavilions or other ways where people can maintain distance, and often using like a big wall of a center or something like that to have the virtual options. So there still kind of feels like engagement, but it is complex and it's certainly not the same.
Yeah, we've been doing mostly all virtual, which has been obviously a huge learning curve. Our like the youth members are, pretty, they got it down. They actually just kicked off their fall training. So it's going to be like 7 weeks of just like trainings and activities. And I saw like their videos and I definitely got FOMO. FOMO stands for fear of missing out. It looked really fun. No, our members, our adult members, it's, it took a while. It also required resources. We did have to extend our budget to purchase laptops and, a few little hotspot things to distribute to folks who really needed them. And I think the biggest thing is, if anyone here knows how to fix it, Chromebooks don't have a good translation. You know how when you're doing simultaneous translation, you click the little globe and you check which language you want. It doesn't work for Chromebooks. So that has been super difficult. If anyone knows how to get around that, please let us know. But overall, it's been mostly virtual. And there have been a few outreach, like in public spaces. Like we're going to be kicking off some community surveying. So, it just requires us, we have like materials to distribute with folks so that we're safe, and reminding folks, that we still want to keep distance, and just setting up that internal structure in the organization for staff and also members.
Excellent. Yeah, this is all new territory. Some of the really interesting strategies I've heard about more on the grassroots level are driving around in a car with a bullhorn, yelling out announcement for something. I have heard of that happening, mostly in rural communities, but I've heard that. And then I've heard WhatsApp threads can be useful sometimes. That was a new one for me. Again, in government, that kind of is like, what? Like, how would we do that? And so how do we know, figuring out how I think at least for COVID, for our government agencies that are used to really traditional models of public meetings, it's really forced us to like get outside our comfort zone in terms of multiple ways of engaging. And I hope that sticks around in terms of, even as we hopefully get back to more in-person things, that we think about, okay, we have to have multiple ways for people to engage in this one thing, and keeping that moving forward. Oh, go ahead, Laura. Yeah.
I was just going to add one thing, because I remembered agencies are in the space. I think we need to relook at that 3 day in advance for translation. There's please let us know 3 days in advance if you require translation. That's really difficult. So relooking that policy, maybe hiring more translators to, be on hand. But yeah, that is something that we've been having to maneuver, and it's been very difficult.
Yeah, and even like us, the web platform we mostly use is not Zoom, and the platform doesn't support simultaneous interpretation. So we have this like terrible workaround that is not helpful. And so we're trying to figure out if we can get Zoom so we can have better interpretation. But then yeah, we still have that 3-day thing, exactly like you mentioned. So we have to get nimbler in our agency, get used to doing interpretation on a very regular basis. And I do think the virtual is helping with that. I'm sorry, I know we're way over time. Last question. I want to make sure we get to Jesse's question. Last question for the panel before we take a break. How do you balance centering the community's needs and looking to the community to drive adaptation processes or these engagement processes, while not also placing additional work on communities and making that process more equitable? I know we're coming to the same entities all the time and trying to get the similar kind of feedback. How would you advise us to balance that? Your thoughts?
I think one of the biggest things is making sure there's funding for a strong community-based partner or a trusted group of folks that want that leadership ability and want to take on some additional capacity. Again, it's sort of asking and understanding if folks do want it, but also understanding that anytime we're doing a grant or project platform or anything, it needs to be part of the line items, that this has to be in there for some sort of project support, coordination support, just making sure that the trusted partners are compensated in a way that feels best for them. Often that is going to be fiscally, I found, and having even stronger, like multiple layers of partners to help support so that it's not on individual community member or just a few community members, but that they know who to go to and can connect with folks that are trusted and feel safe throughout the entire process, and that groups at sort of a more regional level can handle some of the issues related to different policy or different funding mechanisms come down, and others can focus on the more like present needs of getting mental health services and coordinating the right folks to do so, as an example.
Manny or yeah.
I'll just say that, I think it needs to just start early on this process, and as much as said, that this idea of making sure that we are putting this in our projects, in our proposals, so that it is clear from the get-go, this is the process that we're going to follow. And I think just fundamentally for us is just continue to build trust with the trusting relationships with a lot more of these communities, and getting out there and doing that to demonstrate sort of like our intentions and our willingness to partner, and not just in terms of how sort of compensation for their time, but also the benefit sharing of outcomes.
Yeah, definitely funding in advance, and like a good line item, something that really considers the work that organizers and community-based organizations are doing, given there are going to be additional line items that we require as translation, materials, things like that. So funding is definitely super important. And just to reiterate, existing work, a lot of it, we're doing so much work, and a lot of our work is so holistic, and it definitely has a connection. So we just need to find that connection and build off of the work. So research, get to know the work that we're doing. A lot of us, have social media accounts. We all have websites. Reach out and try, and try to chat. I know I have like so many unread emails in my inbox. It's hard. But try to fund existing work, and then again, disrupting the process. If we're asking for more time and we require more time, be willing to do that with us.
Thanks so much for that. I think one last thing I'll add that I've heard from communities, and then for us and government, is for us and government to coordinate internally within our agencies to align our engagement asks sometimes. Because sometimes we have one end of our organization asking the same organization for something, and then another end of our organization asking the same organization for things. So trying to align ourselves internally so we have a little bit more holistic asks so we don't overburden, I think has been something we've heard that we need to do better at. All right, so I have totally blown up this agenda. I am sorry, I've gone way over time. They'll never ask me to facilitate anything again. But thank you so much to Baja, Laura, and Manny for your expertise and your time. And we will share their slides with everybody on the line. So we're going to take a 5-minute stretch break, but I'll hand it back to Julia to get us through that transition. Thank you, everybody, again.
Great, thanks, Monica. And yeah, huge thanks to all of our speakers, Baja, Laura, Manny. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. I mean, clearly, you can see from the chat popping off, your presentations were incredibly valuable. And if we were gathered in person, I know there would be a loud, very loud round of applause. So again, thank you so much. And to everyone, thanks for joining us for this workshop. Of course, we'll take a few minutes, maybe reconvene around 11:20. In the meantime, I'll just play some music so that to keep us company as we take a break. But do take care of yourselves, and we'll jump back in around 11:20 and start the breakouts. We'll see you back here soon.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. All right. Hopefully everyone is returning back to your desks. We're going to start to move into breakouts now, and I'll pass it over to our other track facilitator, Faye, to tee things up for us.
All right. Thanks, Julia, for the amazing intermission music. Hope everybody got a chance to stretch during that brief break. So now we'll be moving into breakout rooms. These will focus on 3 key topics. First, just to kind of reflect a little bit about what we've heard from the speakers, balancing how to move fast and intentionally, navigating community involvement, and also the specific resilience strategies that are highlighted. The second was think a little bit specifically about the community outreach strategy, both virtual and hybrid models, and thinking about, what's possible in this time of COVID. And then lastly, just thinking a little bit about funding and financing strategies. This got touched upon a little bit in the Q&A session. So I wanted to give an opportunity for us to kind of brainstorm some of those points. These breakout rooms will be self-facilitated, and again, Julia will demo the Jamboard, which I think hopefully everybody has gotten pretty familiar with. We'll have 1 slide per breakout room, and there will be different sections on each slide to kind of for each topic that I just mentioned. So now Julia will just show the Jamboard, and we'll dive into that.
Thanks, Faye. So everyone should be able to see my screen. This is the Jamboard slide, and I shared a link to the Jamboard through chat. Everyone should be able to access it. The first thing to do once the breakout rooms launch will be to navigate to the correct slide for your room. So you'll see that in the top left corner, and just clicking over to the next frame until you land in the room that corresponds with the breakout room that you're in through Zoom. So Faye mentioned the 3 overarching topics. So just reflecting on this kind of dual challenge of moving fast and slow, sharing some virtual and hybrid community engagement strategies, and then also strategies to fund and finance community involvement for your projects over time. You can use, I think the sticky notes are probably the easiest way to add things. So you can click that icon, save it, and then move it to the spot that you would like to. You can also change the color if you would, if that's helpful as well. Get rid of that one. We've been using Jamboards quite a bit, so hopefully folks are familiar with this. And give me 1 moment, and I will go ahead and launch the breakout rooms. As I prepare to do that, any questions that folks might have before we jump in? All right. we'll reconvene at 11:45. So enjoy the discussions. As noted, these are self-facilitated, but we may be popping in and out of some breakout rooms to provide some support where it might be helpful. So enjoy. We'll provide some time reminders along the way. All right, welcome back. It's always fun just to kind of take a peek at the Jamboards to see how the conversations are going in each of the breakout rooms. But we'd love to hear from each room, just a quick takeaway. We won't have too much time, but I'll kind of pass it to each of you, kind of just room by room. If somebody from that room wanted to just jump in and share, I don't know, any major themes that came up, or just 1 to 2 quick key takeaways. So we'll start with room 1. I'll go ahead and share my screen. Does someone from room 1 want to just highlight a couple of key takeaways? I might start calling on folks if nobody wants to volunteer.
I can go, Julia. I was in room 1, so just hoping somebody else is going to go. Yeah, we just kind of, we spent a lot of time putting the sticky notes in, so most of our thoughts are there. One question that came up actually, and if Nick and or Manny are on the line, it was more specific about like how to engage tribes around prescribed burning, especially with like resource managers. So like that kind of specific engagement need. So might follow up with y'all to connect one of our group members about that. So just trying to think about these like specific engagement processes. But we also talked a bit about so sort of like the pros and cons of virtual versus in person, and you know, that virtual can help be flexible, but sometimes we have to be we need to make sure the intentionality is still there and there's still a need for in-person engagement for sure. Trying to think what else. Yeah, most of our stuff is in sticky notes. I'll just stop there.
Great, thanks, Monica. And others from the first group, room 1, feel free to share anything else via chat. Otherwise, we'll pivot over to room 2. Jeff, Natalie, or Paul, if you want to share any quick takeaways from your conversation. Not to put you too on the spot, Paul, but I see you're still here with us. Anything you want to share from your conversation?
Oh boy, I'm so wrapped up in my own thinking on this that I'm not sure that it's fair for me to speak for the rest. I think one of the things that we were pondering was in terms of a hybrid community engagement. Is there a way of taking advantage of what I would call natural community gathering places? This could be a church, it could be a social club, a small group where people are already gathering, and link those small groups together in a webinar so that multiple small groups participate, but all are remote. And so you're not getting the potential mass super spreader events, and taking advantage of people going to somewhere where they are already comfortable. That also means it could be easier to provide the IT connectivity needed to make it work well. And let's see. And then a general thought about the rest are on the notes. I think the key issues.
Thanks, Paul. I mean, I think what you just noted in terms of, how do we kind of connect in-person events through virtual means. I've seen this happen even before COVID, where there were like regional workshops, but then regions that are really large, they'll have sub-regional kind of in-person meetings. That's like those in-person hubs, and then virtually connecting everybody through Zoom or a different platform. I'm sure we'll see more of that model coming up. Hopefully folks can continue engaging with others in this track. If you're hearing that, if you're hearing someone jump in with the question that you've been grappling with, or if you have resources to share, I encourage folks to get connected outside of these workshops. Otherwise, let's pivot over to room 3. Angie, Danny, Kim, Nick, Sarah, any of you want to share some quick key takeaways?
Well, first, I want to comment that regarding Native American burning, the place to start locally is with CAL FIRE, because before you can do any control or prescribe burning, you have to get permission from a whole variety of state and local agencies, and you have to be specially trained and certified. So the best place to start is always with CAL FIRE, and then they can direct you. In Sonoma County, it's called Good Fire, the group that does the training and so forth. Any of the rest of my group want to comment on? Yeah, basically, what we talked about a little bit is that it's difficult, and there's a variety of ways that we can move, working with existing organizations, not trying to reinvent the wheel. And probably fundamentally, it's about relationship building with any agency, especially private agencies, less so with public. And that if, in terms of funding, that one of the primary things for everybody is always to have your goals clearly stated, so that when you see money might become available to do something, you've already done the hard part, and that it's all in place before you go on.
Thanks, Nick. All right, a couple more rooms here. Anyone from room 4? Joyce, Lindy, Sarah, Vanessa, do you want to share a few key takeaways?
Well, I can start, and if someone wants to chime in after. Something that I brought up was I come from a state agency, and we did outreach very archaically. I was an environmental planner, so basically we're engaging for CEQA compliance, and it was like, we have to advertise this, so let's put it in the newspaper. We have to have a person or meeting in person, and like very structured format and everything like that. And despite the fact that people don't read newspapers as much anymore, and social media impacts or reaches a lot more people, basically the agency was not willing to adjust, because this is the way we've always done it. And these other things, they're good ideas, but we don't have to do them necessarily. And so I think a big benefit of COVID was that it kind of pushed the government to kind of think about it and be forced to consider more virtual meetings for compliance, since we couldn't meet in person. And I think what hopefully my dream is that we can do both, have it in person and also broadcast it online, because I think we found that it reached a lot more people. It wasn't as maybe disruptive as we thought. Of course, it was a new format, so people were freaking out. How are we going to talk to people? How are people going to ask us questions? Oh my God, this is the end of the world. And we were forced to kind of do it. And now that we've done it, and there's a system in place, hopefully moving forward, it's something we can move to do just on the regular. So I know there's a lot of negatives on virtual in terms of who you can reach, but I just also wanted to bring up that point of it was actually really innovative, and really a big step to getting state governments more involved with people. And that, and in my opinion, I think it was not all our projects were very accessible to everybody. And I think that was kind of on purpose, because if your project's really controversial, you don't want everybody coming into the room and yelling at you and getting all this negative feedback, but that feedback is important. And by accessing a little bit more people with virtual and in person, you get a little bit more feedback. So that to me was, I don't know, a big point. Anyone else in the room wants to say anything?
Great, thanks, Vanessa.
I was just going to say that the one thing that we combined in terms of moving fast and slow in funding and financing strategies is that it's really important to start providing stable sources of funding for this work. When you are on grant deadlines, it forces you and everyone else in the work through a constrained timeline that doesn't necessarily make any sense for the issue. And so relying on grants and special funding is a big problem for community as well as agencies. And it creates timelines that are unrealistic for often the problems. So.
That's a really great point, Lindy. And often it can lead to relationships becoming somewhat more transactional as opposed to building those deeper, more authentic, longer term relationships that we're all wanting to and trying to with communities that we're serving. All right, last but not least, we'll shift over to room 5. Gabriella, Faye, Jessica, Beatrice, one of you want to share some takeaways?
Yeah, thanks. So we spent a lot of time talking about the virtual and hybrid community engagement possibilities. There was an interesting example raised about the Elephant Builder platform, which is a software that kind of allows people to share together on a particular vision for a problem. So we talked a lot about like the pros and cons of the different virtual and hybrid models, and the point was made that the virtual world has allowed us to connect with organizations that we may not have been able to connect with ordinarily. And there is also some learning curves that we need to kind of tackle in order to do that. We also talked a little bit about small grants funding as a way to meet immediate needs, but that there is still a lot of kind of like red tape and existing protocols that don't necessarily apply for these kind of small, fast-paced grants. So wanting to find some way to streamline those without the red tape. I think those were kind of the highlights.
Excellent, thanks, Faye. So as we have been doing with the previous workshops, we'll be sure to share the recording of the main session, the notes, presentations that we heard earlier today, as well as this Jamboard. Likely next week, we'll package everything up and share everything back out. Just wanted to also recognize, as this being the third and final workshop for this track, just thanking everyone for taking the time to join us for this one and an entire series for those who were able to. If you remember, we covered some big topics, starting with how we dismantle white supremacy in the workplace and moving into how can we actualize racial equity and move beyond just talking about principles and truly and thoughtfully integrating racial equity as part of our work. And now thinking about how do we engage communities in an authentic way in this kind of COVID world, and also thinking about this challenge of needing to move urgently due to climate change, but then also slowing things down so we can be intentional. We do have our final outcomes webinar scheduled for October 18th, 2 to 3:30 p.m. As Monica noted earlier on, we'll share kind of a high-level overview of some of the takeaways from this workshop series and feature a new set of case studies that address some of the major challenges that came up throughout the workshop. With that, I wanted to give Faye, Nick, or Monica a chance to jump in with any closing thoughts before we wrap up.
I think you covered it, Julia.
All right. Okay. I know we're also at time, so just want to thank everyone again for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us. We'll be in touch next week. I hope everyone has a great rest of your weeks, and then hopefully we'll see you again in a few weeks with the Tracks Outcomes webinar. Thanks again, everyone.